have Mr. Paul Smith, who's going to, and maybe others, are going to make a presentation by the Tourism Economics Commission.
Good evening. Slide one. Let's first of all talk. What is this hearing all about? It's designed to enter into a three-phase process where we can deal with solar and energy development with a number of different processes. So this is a presentation tonight. Joining me in this presentation will be Andrea Compton, the Chief of Resources for Joshua Tree National Park. We asked her to join us because she participates on a close basis in the development of these plans with the government. She worked for NPS in doing that, so she has a great technical knowledge and will have some maps as to how the two main processes are working. The solar PEIS, which covers the 6 western states, which now has a finality to it, and then the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan, which covers more than solar. It covers all alternatives, and it's in California based. It's both California and the federal government. So that's kind of what we'll be talking about tonight. Seth Steyer from the National Park Conservation Association is going to explain, I think probably for the first time publicly, how a potential transfer of the saddle from the BLM to Joshua Tree National Park can be of great benefit. This is something that a lot of us who have been looking at this and working on it, we're dedicated to making sure that historic uses that have been made of the saddle continue on, and that by working with Seth and the National Park Service, we can make something really good happen with that. So what is this first thing that we can see what this is about? Okay, I would like to show this first slide. If I can, wait a second, I need to turn this on. It's not working on the screen. This is in 29 Palms. This is at the 29 Palms Inn. That mountain back behind 29 Palms potentially could be, or the mountain range over there that's still in the BLM could be covered with windmills. They could be over 400 feet high, flashing red lights going all day long. There's presently an application for 20,000 acres of such a windmill farm. We believe it's in the process of being withdrawn. We can't get written confirmation of that. But what we see is a present management, a BLM, which has a different management philosophy than the National Park Service, being much more willing to give up our precious desert for that sort of thing. So I think at first I'd like then to, I'll say next slide. What's the next slide here? Okay, here's what we're talking about. Those are the solar panels that are out on Lear Road right now. Next. That's, I think, 100 some odd acres immediately to the south of that where it's being expanded. Most of you will recognize this. We're starting to drive by it and wondering what's happening to our community. And next. And this is a very large one that's going on at the corner of Morongo and Indian Trail. It's presently under construction right now. Again, there's a residence right next door to it, which is getting some benefit. They're renting parking space from him. So that's what this is really about. What's happening to our community and what do we think about it? And we're going to talk about the county's role in it and what we should maybe ask the county to do, as well as come to an understanding and enable the city here to take action to influence these plans so that we're hurt the least by them. So I'd like to introduce Andrea Compton. Andrea is Chief of Resources with Joshua Tree National Park. You met her, I think, several months ago when we had the first of these sessions.
As Ms. Compton is coming up, I think it might be noteworthy for folks to understand that all of those slides that Mr. Smith just showed us are in the county, not within the city limits. But they're right adjacent. So I just thought it might be important for those not only sitting here, but would be looking at this later. Ms. Compton.
Yes, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time and your interest again this evening. My name is Andrea Compton, Chief of Resources at Joshua Tree National Park, and I wanted to cover, as Paul mentioned, several things this evening. And the first of those, actually I have...
Is this a different PowerPoint now?
Yes, it is a different PowerPoint.
Hold on.
Okay.
Sorry.
And actually, each of you should have hard copies of these maps in front of you as well. Okay, good. For the public, I do have some extra copies of those for people who are interested. You can talk to me later on when we're done if you'd like to see those, or have copies. So this is, some of these maps should actually look a bit familiar. I was here in February, and this is basically an update for those as well. And so going to the next slide, this first shows the renewable energy projects that are in proximity to Joshua Tree National Park and to 29 Palms. And what I wanted to do here was to mention some of those projects specifically because while the locations may not have changed that much, what has changed are some of the approaches or some of the processes and some of the things we're seeing happening with each of these projects that I think is worth kind of pointing out. One of them Paul referred to already was Podoma Wind Energy, and this is one that is immediately east of and kind of southeast of 29 Palms in the Saddle area. And as Paul mentioned, the BLM has told us, all right, here we go. The BLM has told us, that's kind of in this area, and the BLM has told us that that has been removed. The company has withdrawn their permit. But one of the things that we have seen with other projects is this approach of stacked projects. So it's been identified by one company as being possible for generating wind. So there could be another company out there that might be interested in the same area. We don't have any indications of that specifically yet, but it's a possibility with any of these renewable energy sites. So that is one of them. The first wind going more to the east, that is over by 177 and along 62, that intersection. That project is still in place. That's about 99 square miles of proposed wind turbines. Right now it is a permit request for 9 meteorological towers. The BLM has identified this as a high conflict, low priority because of the proximity to Joshua Tree National Park and the potential impacts to the resources that would occur. And so the BLM has indicated they would, this permit was received in the spring, they would, in 6 months, they would review it again. So in the fall, we expect the BLM to take another look at this and reconsider the project again. Another wind project is Black Butte, which is northwest of Yucca Valley. The meteorological towers of that are in as well. So these Met towers can be in place for 3 years. They have 3 years of surveying and sampling to just see is there enough wind generated to make the project feasible. And at that point, then they can apply for a permit for the towers themselves, the formal wind towers. So those are some of the wind projects that are nearby. I want to point your attention to the Palin project, which is on the southeast side of the maps. It's down along I-10, and this is a project where the original company that had proposed this project as a dry-cooled technology has gone bankrupt. Their site went onto the auction, and BrightSource purchased it. BrightSource is a company that constructs power towers. To give you a brief introduction for power towers, these are areas of, it's one large tower, and large is 650 to 800 feet tall, so equivalent of an 80-story building. Around the base of this, they place big mirrors, heliostats, that direct all the heat up towards this single point. And the goal is to get this superheated point that is used, there's a material in there that is used to generate electricity from that. So as you are driving up along 15 towards Las Vegas, you can actually see a couple of these that are in construction. There is a project out towards Rice that has been approved for a power tower. Construction on that is expected to start in March of 2013. So as you head out to the river, you can watch that progress. There are other power towers proposed around south of Blythe. There are quite a few that are kind of in concept and being proposed for development. There's a project north of the Marine base as well. So they are around. Bright Source is showing success with some of this technology. It is, and if you look on the internet, you can see that it is really a brilliantly bright spot and plus the reflection of the mirrors. So it will be visible on the landscape for quite a distance. So those are kind of some new things that are coming up beyond just the solar panels that Paul had showed pictures of. The next slide. So the next two things I wanted to discuss were updates on two planning efforts that are occurring for the desert. One is a federal initiative. The BLM has a programmatic environmental impact statement that was released in July, and this is for solar development across 6 different states. So Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, and California. So this, and the final EIS was released in July. They are expecting a record of decision in October of this year. So next month they will finalize this. The map that you see now is a blow-up of one of the kind of our area. Again, looking at 29 Palms, Morongo Basin, and Joshua Tree National Park. So it has very pretty colors. So I thought I should explain the pretty colors. One of the things that has happened through this planning effort is called solar energy zones. And the one that is nearest to us is the Riverside East Solar Energy Zone. It's down near Blythe. And this is an area where the BLM would encourage and try to focus development. We have some projects that are actually under construction there already. For this area, there is a projected 80% development for renewable energy within that zone. So 80% of the land would be for renewable energy projects of a variety of types. They could be dry-cooled, they could be photovoltaic, or they could be these power towers that are being proposed as well. There are 17 of these solar energy zones across the 6 states. Another one that used to be fairly close was Iron Mountain, which is farther along 62, between the river and 29 Palms. And that is one that was removed. There were concerns about cultural resources, the amount of infrastructure that would needed to be built, the additional transmission lines, the additional facilities. That is not there now like it is along I-10. So that one was removed. So Iron Mountain was removed as a solar energy zone. The other color to note related that's similar is the light blue colors that are on this map. And you can see those kind of scattered, especially west of 29 Palms. The light blue is what's called variance lands. The variance lands are opportunities for solar development outside of solar energy zones. We don't know exactly what that means, but it does mean additional documentation, additional records would need to be developed for the BLM. Within the solar energy zones, they expect those areas to be very well studied. Information will be shared kind of across the board about plants, about animals, but in the variance lands, there's not as much as studied or known, so they'd have to reinitiate a lot of that information. More documentation would be needed for each project. And you can see quite a few of the blue scattered. Some of these are quite small. As a scale, that you can see the white squares are 1 mile square. So some of those blue variance lands are pretty small. We're not quite sure what that means for the basin or for large public utility scale, but it is an option that the BLM has identified in their plan. And it kind of showed up in July. It was not something we had noticed on their planning efforts before. So it's something still to kind of be determined how that will play out, how those variance lands. Now the other two colors, yellow are BLM lands that cannot be developed for solar energy. Most of these are wilderness. And then the pink are exclusion lands. And this is a new designation. There's not a particular land designation right now, but these would be lands that would also not be available for solar development. And some of this is to maintain connections with habitat or to add protection for around national parks, those types of things. So we're seeing more exclusion lands than we did on the previous views. So I think that's a good thing for tourists and impacts to visitors and those types of things. So those are kind of the three things to emphasize with the solar EIS. Now the solar EIS is just solar. It doesn't cover other renewable energy sources, and it only covers BLM lands. Now the next effort, and the next slide please. Yes, of course.
In that upper,
Sorry. Northeast of 29 Palms, that big blue spot there, is that on the other side of Sheep Hole?
Yes, it is, and that is actually a dry lake bed. It's up near the chloride plants, and it is not a project right now, but that we've been told, but it is identified, because it's so flat, is identified as possible lands for renewable energy within the BLM PEIS program.
And that dotted black line that comes along there indicates what? See how it kind of outlines?
Yes, I do see it, and I don't know off the top of my head. I thought it was counties, but that's not quite right.
No, because the county would go all the way to the river, but...
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Those are... I think those might be subdivisions of within the solar energy plan.
Thank you, ma'am.
It's not quite right for county, but I can look it up and let you know. Would that be helpful? Okay.
That's fine, thank you. I just was curious.
Okay. Are there any other questions about the PAIS right now? Okay. All right, the next slide. So this is the statewide initiative. So this is the California Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan. And then this is, again, a long-term plan, 25 to 40 years. And this plan focuses only on California, and it covers all renewable energy sources. So this is where not just solar, but wind comes into play and geothermal as well. In late July, there were 5 alternatives that were presented to the public at a stakeholder meeting. And I will say that this map is alternative 5, which represents what they called increased geographic and technology flexibility. So this shows the most amount of land of any of the 5 alternatives that would be possible for renewable energy of one sort. So it allows options for the companies to pick the best locations for the land to be able to generate the most wind or generate the most sunlight or energy from sunlight depending on location. The other end of that, alternative 1, includes much smaller acreage and only on disturbed lands. So that's just to give you an idea of the range of alternatives that are being presented right now. And what I wanted to point to here, the development focus areas, these are presented as the areas that would be available for renewable energy development. So it's similar to the solar energy zones. And in fact, if you look down towards southeast of the park, you can see that there's overlap between the development focused area in this map and the solar energy zone from the BLM PEIS. So they are trying to have the 2 plans interact. What we're not sure about yet is how the variance lands that were specified in the BLM plan will interact with the DRECP, with the lands that are proposed here. So there's still some things that they're sorting out for each of those. This plan is open for comment and review right now. As far as the schedule, they're looking at now November that they will be finalizing and printing this document. So that's kind of, both of these documents they're looking at finishing them up. This one is still they're working the most quickly and kind of comprehensively to adjust boundaries and changes and get input from people and those types of things. So I encourage people, if you want to look up either of these on websites, it's really easy to do. If you do either the Google DRECP or PEIS, it comes up as one of the top two. So it's easy to find if you're looking for more information. Or if you have questions for me, I can help as well along those lines. So that's a quick summary for now. And at this point, did you want to do questions?
Maybe we should do questions at the end.
Okay, that sounds fine. So I will be available later for questions if people have specific things that you have thought of between now and then, or you can always give me a call and ask as well. So I'm available to help there also.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And with that, I will switch to Sethshire.
Good evening. Thanks for having us here tonight. My name is Seth Steyer, and I'm field rep for National Parks Conservation Association. I believe I have a slide somewhere in there, if you can find that. It might be the next one. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you tonight about the saddle lands, which are located east and south of the city of 29 Palms, and these are BLM lands. And as you may or may not know, these lands were once part of Joshua Tree National Monument, but were removed in the 1950s due to mining interests. So today the saddle lands have some spectacular resources. You can see on your map that the wildlife corridors are designated in hatching, and they connect Joshua Tree National Park through the saddle to the 29 Palms Marine Base. These are critical wildlife corridors for a variety of species, including badger and desert tortoise. The area is also a DWIMA, or Desert Wildlife Management Area, so it's critical habitat for the threatened desert tortoise. And it's also a place where a lot of people from your city go to recreate. They go to, do off-road vehicle driving. They go to do recreational mining. There's even a shooting range up there, I think, as well. So the saddle certainly has some recreational values. Over the past year, we've become a bit concerned about the future of the saddle, and mainly because of the threat of renewable wind energy development. As mentioned in the earlier presentations, the Podoma Wind Project, which was slated to be developed on 20,000 acres in the saddle. And so a project of that size and scope would disrupt a great deal of forms of recreation, would also disrupt wildlife corridors and damage some sensitive wildlife habitat. So we're interested in putting forth the idea of reuniting the saddle with Joshua Tree National Park. But we're interested in doing this in a different sort of way, an inclusive sort of way, that would honor existing forms of recreation, like off-road vehicle driving on designated routes, like recreational mining, which has a rich heritage, and like the shooting range, which is up there too, as well as passive users of this area. So because, my background is actually in conservation, but I'm also a school teacher for many years, we wanted to find out how this would impact local communities like yours. And I don't have an economics background, but we did commission an economic study, which I believe has been distributed to you. And so the economic study really found that there were tangible economic benefits as well to adding the saddle lands back to Joshua Tree National Park. So the tangible benefits were basically in three different categories. The first category was increased visitation and visitor spending. It stands to reason that if a new area was added to Joshua Tree National Park, this would attract more visitors, and thus those visitors would eat in our restaurants, sleep in our hotels, buy gas and souvenirs, etc. The second form of benefit really comes from construction, because along with the transfer of the lands, our economic study evaluated sort of an upgrade of facilities to National Park Service standard. So this includes the creation of some campgrounds. It includes the creation possibly of a small visitor center or ranger station. It includes some miles of paved roads and some miles of upgraded dirt roads back there, and some trails up to National Park Service standard. And the third way and last way is increased National Park Service management. So you have a larger area now, you need more National Park Service staff, and that creates jobs within the community. But that has a double effect, really, because those folks who are hired to be National Park Service reps will spend in local communities. So, for instance, more law enforcement rangers to help keep the public safe, more interpretive rangers to staff a visitor center potentially, or to interpret the rich mining history, more maintenance staff to keep roads good, and also to maintain campgrounds and clean bathrooms. So our study really had two scenarios in it. The first one was a modest services facility scenario. And this is kind of, to use a car analogy here, I hope there's some car enthusiasts here. This was the Cadillac of the scenarios. And then we had a minimal services facility scenario, and if you want to push the car analogy a little further, this was more like a Chevy Impala with a radio, I think. So, to describe the modest services facility scenario is basically a large campground, about 100 campsites, a small ranger station, a small visitor center, significant number of miles of paved roads and upgraded dirt roads, a significant number of trails upgraded to National Park Service standards and trailheads. And so our study found that that would increase visitation to Joshua Tree National Park once the upgrade was complete, up to 300,000 visits per year. So those visitors, we found, would infuse the local economy with up to $40 million additionally and support ongoing 511 recreation, administration, and temporary construction jobs as well for the upgrade of facilities. So that's the Cadillac of scenarios. Now moving on to the minimal services facility scenario. That is a smaller campground of about 30 sites. Then there are lesser trailheads and fewer roads and facilities. So we projected that that would increase visitation by 42,000. That's 42,000 visits per year. Infuse local economies with $5.3 million. And also it would support ongoing 78 jobs in retail, recreation, and administration, as well as temporary construction jobs. The cost in federal dollars of the Cadillac scenario, or the moderate services facility scenario, was $7.3 million that would be spent on construction contracts, and for the minimal services facility scenario, it was $2.3 million. So, in closing, I'd say that there are some real tangible economic benefits to reuniting the saddle with Joshua Tree National Park, but I think there's also a lot of other good reasons too. One is it would help protect it from future threat of renewable energy development. Two, we do so in such a way that would preserve existing recreational uses. And three, it would protect our natural heritage and allow people to learn about the rich mining history of the area. Thank you.
Seth, I don't know that I have a question for you, but is that realistic? Maybe Ms. Compton can possibly address that. To preserve what's out there now in terms of recreation, whether it be off-road vehicles or the mining, those kinds of things. Is that really possible to protect that under the rules of National Park Services? If that range, that shooting range is within there, now you have, the rules about not bringing firearms into the park and those kinds of things.
There are lots of different classifications of national parks. So there are national preserves. So for example, Mojave Preserve includes hunting, has different ranching. So there's a whole range of components that fit into. So I do think it's possible. It's something that you set up in the enabling legislation when you establish that site that helps define what is allowed and what can be maintained or what cannot. So it is definitely possible.
Who do you think this doesn't sound right for English, but who do you think the you is that can set that up? You said you can set those rules and regulations and standards and so forth for that area, but who is that you that sets that up?
So that is set up in combination with the legislators, we get involved with the senator's office, and so wording gets submitted that is involved. So that's why one of the reasons that it's coming forward to this group is it something that is of interest to this community, or would be of intrigue, or would be of value. So there's opportunities to work with the communities to get that set up. And the congressional representatives, it becomes kind of a triangle of going to the Park Service and local constituents to say, is this what's wanted? Is this what's needed? Does that make sense?
I think it does.
Okay.
I think you said, are we as a community interested in the BLM lands being assimilated into the national park with the idea that it would maintain those current recreational and other uses out there for our immediate community and other visitors? Is that what I heard you say?
That's correct. And are there ways that it could be enhanced? Would it be helpful to include a campground, to allow additional users to come in, RVs or something like that? Or that's all things that you think about in the planning effort. Well, for what's the best use of that area to make it useful for local residents, but also visitors.
So what, because we have people that are sitting out here now that use that extensively, and so what would be the procedure then, based on what Seth said, based on what you said, based on what Paul said? What's happening in terms of procedurally to make this happen or not happen, as the case may be?
So at this point, I'm going to turn back to Paul and to Seth, because I'm just a lowly chief of resources.
Mr. Mayor, I do have a question.
Okay, we have another question.
Just to be clear, so in other words, this also could be set up for off-road?
I think what it would be is defining what that means or how it's used, because there's some areas that are designated as off-road where people can go wherever. There's other places where off-road means on designated roads. I don't think we've defined that yet. It's just kind of a concept or an idea at this point. So we haven't defined that level yet.
Thank you.
I think that's wide open for that idea.
I'd like to comment on this. When the Mojave National Preserve became a preserve, and I own property out in the National Preserve, and we were told that the National Park would work with us. They would not be closing any of the roads that have been there where hunters could go way into the back and hunt and everything. They are very slowly closing. Believe me, they're closing. So I am really not comfortable with like Gold Park giving that up to the national park. In 5 years, they can say, well, we're going to close that all up. And they will do it. You can't tell me that they won't do it. They will do it. And it just concerns me that that's what's going to happen later on in life for our grandkids and their grandkids and grandkids after that.
And that's, I don't know, not that familiar with Mojave Preserve or how things are happening or the way that they are happening there.
They're closing.
And they're closing them, okay. And I know that there were some approaches with the Desert Protection Act that was, at least now this is my personal opinion, from what I'm hearing is that there was not as much interaction as people would have liked with the development of that. And so I think this is an opportunity to say, okay, is there a different way? Or is there a different approach we can take? So.
Any other questions? Okay. You had some comments, Paul?
Yes. I am very respectful of these comments about the history of the Mojave National Preserve, and I view this as an opportunity if we really seize it. And I would like to point out that this is not a national park project. This is a project that's that will probably be sponsored in Washington by the National Park and Conservation Association. You're seeing that we're extremely interested in an open house where we get careful input as to what demands should be made as our request here. The city is not going to be able to do it by itself, but I know from talking to pretty influential people that the opinions and desires and requests of this city will be very key to what happens and how it happens. So you kind of have to look at this a little bit differently. This is something that is going to be what I would call a series of negotiations. And you see these people in the audience who are a great part of the recreational mining industry. We have asked them to participate heavily in this so that we don't miss something. One of them delivered to me a portfolio of claims documents, for example, as to how the claims are filed and how they last and what changes might have to legislatively be made in that so that the what's called the bequest value of land can be respected. A bequest value is an appraisal concept that says land can be leased or granted to somebody for their use, and if that use continues on into the future, then it has a bequest value to future generations. It's very difficult to put a dollar value on it, but it's very real. And some of these concepts we're going to try and carry through on this. And a part of this, the negotiation, I'm departing from our script, but I looked at this because I don't want to see these uses curtailed or disappear without one really good reason, and I want those reasons to be known ahead of time. So I looked back and I said, okay, from the national park standpoint, what's important here? Okay, well, the first thing that's most important is to curtail wind and solar energy from closing it off and really disturbing and abusing the ground. And I'm going to cover a little bit how that abuse will occur later. Another interest that they'll have will be in the wildlife corridors. These are wildlife corridors here. These shaded areas. They link between mountainous areas and across valleys, and they link Joshua Tree National Park right now to the Mojave National Preserve and to the Marine Base, which is an excellent steward of the land. If that's blocked off by solar and wind energy, and my own opinion is the folks that are working on those solar and wind farms could care less, if that's blocked off, then not only are we affecting our tourism and local industries, from taxes to revenues to jobs, but we're also affecting the ability of this desert to adapt to climate change. And it's becoming more and more real how real that climate change is. So the National Park Service, those are two primary goals that they would like to have. They would also like to make sure that wilderness area, which is this shaded area here and a little bit here, is preserved and protected. Wilderness is a great laboratory that science can do research in, the sorts of things that, the habits of wild animals and the habits of plants and seeds that will help not only Joshua Tree National Park, but they share that learning experience throughout the desert, so it's going to help the desert maintain its status. And one of the key things that we need to remember about our desert, and you've seen some writings from me before, but I'll have to repeat this. The California desert is the best intact ecosystem in the United States. It's in the top 10 protected ecosystems in the world. We're going to lose it if we let these solar and wind and other alternative energy companies just sort of run roughshod over land which they consider to be useless. So that's a major part, that's also a major rationale of the National Park Service. Now if you think about that, if you're at a bargaining table, continued recreational mining continued use of the routes of travel up there don't impact that at all. So it's a good negotiating position to be in. But I share the skepticism, and I think that at the public hearing or the public forum that we'll have, or meeting, and if we have to have more than one, we'll do it. I think that all of that thinking needs to be brought to bear in a very strong, aggressive way, because I don't think it's going to conflict with where the national park wants to go. And there are many units of managed by the National Park Service that aren't even called national parks, and that might even happen to this, where it's called something else, but it will have a different management. And a classic view of the existing management of this area is, where is it? There is not a signpost in that whole 104,000 acres. From over here near us, from over here into the Old Dale District. The Old Dale District, somebody has to tell you, like Joel, where the pipe is on the side of the road that marks the road that goes up into Old Dale. And somebody has to tell you how to get into Gold Park through the side streets of 29 Palms. That will change by having increased management. And I think that I know a lot of the people here who love to enjoy this land, and they spend a real effort maintaining the land. When they go to the shooting ranges, a lot of their time is cleaning up the shooting ranges. When they're out at their campsites, a lot of their efforts are to make them clean and orderly and respectful of the environment. With the input or the assistance of the National Park Service type of organization, and that's one of its key roles, is maintenance and protection. We're going to see an enhanced use of this land. We're going to see enhanced revenues. I think the study that NPCA did was a really masterful touch, because it's hard to translate those things into dollars, but we're sitting right there, right on the edge of it. So a lot of that economic jobs and revenue and taxes are going to accrue to our benefit here. So I think this is an encouragement to enter into that negotiation process. And I'm not worried that somebody comes in and says, I don't like the idea of the National Park Service taking this over. I want to hear everybody really say why. And maybe this city council, which will be a great voice in what happens, will say, we don't think it should be. Or you'll say, if this is built into the legislative framework so that it's law when it's done, it's not administrative discretion of the National Park Service, then I think we might end up with a very good deal. Much better than some of us felt about the Mojave National Preserve.
So if I heard you correctly, the I don't remember the name of National Park Conservancy?
National Parks Conservation Association
is probably going to initiate this concept?
They will be. It was formed in 1916. It's a huge nonprofit organization working with the Park Service that has over 400,000 members. When the National Parks Conservation Association walks into a senator's office or a congressman's office or a committee's office, they're there to listen, usually. Not always, but usually.
Okay, so as far as the folks that are listening or sitting out here, after that proposal is made, then there will be opportunities at hearings and so forth to develop the specifics?
Yes.
Okay.
But I think that we want to do our best job so that it goes back there, and you really said it very well. We want to maintain and preserve the existing recreational uses of that land.
Okay, so who are the we now? So that these folks know who we are in terms of presentations.
Okay, the we are the five of you sitting up there, our Tourism Economics Commission, which consists of over 60 people who are vitally interested in this project, and the National Parks Conservation Association, which will be carrying the load or the suitcase back to Washington, which will have that strong input there.
So what I'm hearing you say is you, as a more local organization, want to get started on this right away to start filling up the suitcase, even before it goes back to Washington, D.C.
Absolutely.
So you'll be scheduling meetings and hearings and opportunities for people to do input, is that?
Absolutely. I expect that and this isn't written in stone, but I expect that, and we need to talk about this more, but I expect that the initial public hearing will probably be held at our community center here. The sponsors of it will be the city, the Tourism Economics Commission, and NPCA. And the whole idea is to get our ideas so that we're up there on the good side of the negotiation, recognizing what the real interests of the park are.
Okay.
That's kind of my goal.
So I guess the folks listening then is started getting your thoughts and ideas organized, and it's going to be through the hearing process, and then it'll have to be decided after some of those hearings how much we as the council will be involved as far as action is concerned. Is that, am I summarizing it?
I believe that's correct. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce has already passed a resolution endorsing this transfer, subject to the condition that existing uses are maintained.
Okay.
And it wasn't highly refined, but the intent of it was, this is a good idea. When you look up and see, when you see how the energy companies are running this desert now, I think we have to look beyond our history of how we've been run before and try and run things more ourselves.
And I think that's been your emphasis tonight, to really point that part of it out of why this is necessary. And then I think for a lot of the community members, the devil's in the details. And so a lot of those aspects are going to have to be put together too.
That's correct, because the devil is in the details. And these guys and the miners back here are correct. They can start out sitting at the table and saying, I'm against this. And then we want to know why. And then we try to figure out, well, if it's consistent with what the National Park Service's real interest is, there's no reason why we shouldn't make significant progress on those points. That's my negotiating position anyway.
Thank you, sir. Are you finished?
No, well, I move on to the next subject in a way.
Okay.
Okay. What this process is there's multiple heads to it. The saddle transfer is only one. And if it happens or doesn't happen, we still have a job to do in terms of this city reaching out beyond its city boundaries to influence these planning efforts that are going on by people who don't care about us. So the hearings also will deal with how do we authorize our city manager to go negotiate with the BLM or write position papers with the DRECP. A lot of that is going on right now. But when a city makes a public statement and says, let's have another map, but go back to my oh, wait a second, you can go back to that. We've got one right there. This one here. Okay, stop there. There's several things happening, and I'm going to do this a little bit piecemeal, but that's fine. Okay, within 29 Palms, we have these installations either already occurring on county land or under the maps that you saw from Andrea on federal land. These solar and wind facilities are being planned. So one step that we're going to ask you to take after the public forums and the hearings is to ask you to request the county to start growing up a little bit on how they manage this. Now there's several, oh, let me show you this. This sort of development will all affect tourism in a very significant way. We know, and we talked about this months ago, we know from well-done surveys over a long period of time that our tourism business here, which generates $1 million in bed tax for this city, plus much more, our tourism industry is fueled by people who are coming here from all over the world who are looking for wide open, unadulterated space. The sort of thing that makes Jim Andre's description of this as probably the purest, unharmed ecosystem in the United States a very valid statement. And our visitors love that aspect of it. So if you go back to the another map. Okay, let's see here. This area up here, which is a variance land, would be left open for development for solar and other alternative energy under these plans. That's right on the corridor that passes from 29 Palms to Amboy, and then ultimately up to areas which our tourists visit in heavy numbers, and we're kind of the starting point of it, which would be the Mojave Preserve and Death Valley. So all of a sudden we're going to start damaging what the tourists want. Then the larger scale map, yes. Okay.
Paul, I think we have to understand that this is a mighty project, and I don't know, I believe we've gotten the picture.
Okay.
But I think we've got a time element tonight.
That's fine.
Okay, so maybe this part of it, if there's another aspect of it, we could
Okay,
do it another time.
there's one other aspect of it, and I'll tell you what the Tourism Economics Commission is doing, and you'll see what the city maybe should be doing also. Tomorrow, the Tourism Economics Commission will be posing the following questions to Neil Derry and James Ramos. The Morongo Basin is experiencing a number of commercial industrial solar developments. Are you familiar with these developments? Are they good for the basin? Are you familiar with the guidelines of those developments? Are you familiar with the recommended guidelines for by the Environmental Protection Agency, which are radically different than this? They direct you to warehouse rooftops and disturbed land, not out into our wonderful desert. As a supervisor, what steps do you plan to take with respect to planning for these developments? Please discuss the present development codes of the county and what steps you would take to amend and supervise them. That's pointing at something we're already getting disturbed by, and we're not getting good responses from the county.
So that's tomorrow where?
Pardon me?
Tomorrow where?
These will be questions posed to the candidates by the Tourism Economics Commission, and the responses will be published.
Okay, so you're sending them, and they're going to
That's right.
respond in writing.
It's like an election inquiry. But if you talk to your city manager, you'll find a very frustrated man in terms of trying to get the county to work and explain how they're going about doing this. What is their planning? And the one aspect, and I'll be really as brief as I can. What the county is doing is falling into the same trap as the big plans. They're ignoring the recommendations of the EPA. They're not putting it on rooftops. They're not putting it on disturbed land. They're going out into our desert. They're also ignoring the scientific recommendations of the U.S. Geological Survey, which says these big plans are a giant experiment. And I'm quoting Dr. Jeff Lovitch, a giant experiment. It could blow up in our face biologically. This ecosystem could be destroyed by what's going on. So that's kind of it. I think we'll have these public forums, and then we'll come back with specific resolutions to tackle these with you folks.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions?
Probably, but we'll save them for another time.
Well, it's very
Thank you.
complicated. Yeah.